Tonight, the University of West Indies and Guardian Group are proud to present our featured speaker, Professor Dan Butin. Professor Butin is the founding dean of the School of Education and Social Policy at Merrimack College.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Dr. Margo Burns, Director for the Center of Excellence in Teaching and Learning. So it is a pleasure and an honor to be here today in this capacity. Being around others who value teaching and learning and think about teaching and learning in this way is a joy. We're here to talk about and to celebrate exemplary teaching. But what I really want to focus on and what I want to suggest is that what we're really here for is to talk about the real fundamental crossroads that not just UWI and not just Trinidad and Tobago and not just all of us in the developed world, but really the entire world is at when we talk about the change of teaching and learning from what I think of as what I call teaching 1.0 to teaching 2.0. This is, for me, fundamentally at the heart of why we are here today, why these award winners are getting the awards, and why the university is so important. Is that our traditional models of teaching and learning, this learning 1.0, teaching 1.0 model, the traditional model where we just inform our students, this is the knowledge. We just send them on their way after they have learned something and don't think again of the implications of it. What is often talked about as shallow learning. And so what we're really talking about is that our old models of teaching and learning no longer are able to prepare our students to be engaged citizens, to be thoughtful in what they do, to do more than just pass the test. This is not an abstract situation of moving from teaching 1.0 to teaching 2.0. The very heart of our economy, the very soul of our culture, the very way that we think about it. And I'm not speaking about just in Trinidad. I'm talking about the United States. I'm talking about in Canada. I'm talking about in Europe. The world is facing this problem because of the rise of digital technologies, because of the speed of our economies, because of globalization. The old models of teaching and learning truly no longer apply. The problem is that we cannot just rest on how the old traditional models have been. We have to find a new way forward, which is why we're here. And so the question, it seems to me, right, is what, and this is exactly how we're talking about today, not only what is the crux of learning, what are student partnerships? And the very first answer that I have to give to you, and we've seen this already when you heard some of the descriptions of what the award winners do, it's that it's a relationship. The first part of my answer, and I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into this, is that it's the relationship between students and teachers that matters. And not just a relationship, because in the end, the partnership between students and teachers is at the heart of all of the human relationships we have. Now, right now, I don't have a relationship with you. Right now, I'm just lecturing at you. You're supposedly listening. Some of you are texting. I see that with the students. But what you are doing right now is being just passive learners. So why trust me? Right? Why listen to what Professor Butin has to say? The reason you should trust me is because the last 100 years of educational research, this isn't me, this is 100 years of educational research, have made it completely clear that the model that best works for teaching and learning is the engaged, active, experiential model where you have students who are involved in their learning, whether it's through an apprenticeship, whether it's through service learning, whether it's through on-the-job training, whether it's the flipped classroom. The way that we break the shallow learning model of education is by getting students involved and engaged. This has been known for over 100 years. John Dewey, the famous American philosopher of education, in 1910 wrote a book, How We Think. And it's actually incredibly profound. You're sitting down, right? All the students, right? You're sitting down, you're not standing up. You might fall down out of shock. The main thing that he says, that thinking, how we think, thinking begins in a moment of doubt. That's actually profound. Thinking begins in a moment of doubt. In other words, you don't just regurgitate information back. You don't just pass the test. You don't just take what's given to you and parrot it back. You have to step backwards. That's what doubt is. You step backwards and you reflect. And you think about, what is it that you're doing? Why are you doing what you're doing? And to what goals are you doing it? And so over 100 years ago, we knew this. And we've known for 50, 60, 70 years, lectures don't work. What I am doing now for you, I'm trying really hard. But what I'm doing right now is the worst way we know to educate, and we do it because it's simply efficient, because it's cost effective, not because you're actually learning. I hope some of you will leave and you will have learned something, because sometimes profound lectures will actually work. But all too often we know, for long-term memory, for actual academic, cognitive outcomes, we have to engage. In my own work, I talk about this a lot, about how the need to change from a knowledge-driven classroom, where the whole idea, right, is the transfer of information. I talk a lot about the need to move beyond even a student-centered model, but into a learning-centered model. To move from the instructor, the faculty member is the expert. We all think we are experts. But you have to move as the faculty member from being the expert, not only to just being a guide, but to being a catalyst. Not only do we have to move from the traditional lecture-based model to a discovery-based model, but one that's real world, that's project-based, that's problem-based learning. And so I talk a lot about and research a lot about and work with faculty a lot, how do you actually change this model from a checklist efficiency model to one that focuses on effective impact, to move students out of their seats into the real world, making use of knowledge, actually seeing with their hands, with their hearts, with their minds, that what they're doing matters. The real key to the question of, if we know this, we know that what I am doing right now, hopefully you're still listening and not texting, what I'm doing right now doesn't work. And if we know that professors have to flip their classroom, professors have to get students engaged, the real reason behind the difficulty is in the end that teaching is dangerous. And what I mean by that, what you have up here is a visual representation. Thomas Kuhn, back in the 1960s, he's a philosopher of science, talked about a paradigm shift. You can think of it as like an aha moment where you move from one to the other. The notion of a paradigm shift is that we've always done things in one way, like the traditional lecture hall. And all of a sudden, there's a crisis. And that all of a sudden, the world basically turns upside down. And so what I want to suggest is that at the crux of learning, at the crux of the student-teacher partnership, is that moment of crisis. We as faculty, we as teachers, have been taught in the way that it has been going on for many, many years in a traditional model. We teach as we are taught. And so when I come up here to the classroom, I believe Professor Copeland, you mentioned this, and it's one of the really difficult things to acknowledge. In higher education, in the university, we are not trained to teach. We are trained to be specific academic experts. And so we get up to the podium and we start lecturing because we're in control, because we know what we're talking about, because our job is to inform our students. It's to get the knowledge from here to there. And so our students can parrot it back on the tests or in their papers or in whatever way we, the professor, demand. But what we realize is that that doesn't work, and that's the crisis. What's the point of me regurgitating information? What's the point of me teaching in a 1.0 manner if it doesn't work in giving you the critical thinking skills, in making you ask questions, in realizing that there is more to education than just this one-way process? And so what happens is, when faculty realize this, there is a crisis. There's a crisis where they realize that their traditional models no longer work. And so what happens is, you have to flip the entire paradigm. That's what happens when you go into a new paradigm of learning. What you have to begin to see is that teaching 2.0 is about not answers, but questions. Not about just the product, the degree you get, but the process of learning. And so the question becomes, remember, we're still on the first part of my answer of the student-teacher partnership. It's about this relationship. But the second part, which I'm going to get to in a minute, is how do you deal with this crisis? Because trust me, every single faculty goes through this. That the second part of the answer about how do we create true student-teacher partnerships, about how do we get to the crux of learning, the first part is the relationship. But the second part is the courage to care. And this is why we're here tonight, because these award winners, in many ways, took that leap of faith, that crisis. You could do two things when you're in a crisis. You could step back and do your traditional old thing, or you can actually move forward through it. So in the end, the reason I think we're here, and the reason I think we're at a crossroads, is because we have to make a choice in higher education. I think we have to make a choice not just at UWI, not just in Trinidad, not just at my college, but to be honest, around the world. Because as Dr. Burns said in her introduction, I've been following the rise of all of these digital learning technologies, of MOOCs and YouTube and the Khan Academy, and today there is no longer an excuse to stay with teaching 1.0. And the question is, what do you do? What do you do as a teacher? What do you do if you actually care about the learning? And you do what these professors do. You do the thing that matters, which is you begin to figure out how to do teaching 2.0. What's the purpose besides the teaching 1.0 model? And the answer is there is no purpose. There is no purpose any longer to believe that the old model of education can actually serve our needs today, not just because of the economic reasons, not just because of the job skill reasons, but because if we want students to become thoughtful, engaged, deliberate citizens who don't just sit back passively, who don't know how to ask questions, who don't know how to be critical thinkers, then what's the point? And so it's in a way a rhetorical question, but in the end, I deeply believe, and I think the research supports me, that if we can't answer the who cares question, we cannot do teaching 2.0. Now, this isn't easy. Let me finish here on this note. This isn't easy to do. That becomes incredibly scary because I, the teacher, no longer am in control. I no longer have all the answers. I no longer control the process. But that, if you really, really think about it, that's what the real world is. The real world is not having all the answers. The real world is collaborating, is working together, is researching, is finding out what you don't know. That's the real world. And so teaching 2.0 is actually incredibly obvious. It's incredibly obvious that you have to link theory and practice, the classroom and the community, that you have to make learning matter. And that is why I believe we're here tonight, and why the crux of learning and student-teacher partnerships can be answered by the notion that you have to create a relationship, you have to know how to care, and you have to be able to know how to answer the so what question. So thank you very much.